Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as a result of a request, I'm going to do my best to explain what's behind Labour's recently announced 5-point economic plan. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, I'm still not able to stand comfortably long enough to record in the studio, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. I have been updating on the community tab of the channel for those who want further details. But I was asked something a couple of days ago now, meant to bring this out yesterday, to say something about Keir Starmer's recently announced 5-point economic pledge on the basis from the person requesting it that it was perplexing to them. Now, in a sense, all campaign promises are perplexing if you try to critically determine what they mean in detail. This is deliberate, or at least it should be deliberate. I've mentioned before that to win power, a party has to appeal to a lot of people. Well, although there are a lot of sheeple voting who don't do a lot of critical thinking, there are still lots of voters you need to attract who want to know what you're going to do. But the problem is that a detailed policy that will delight some but displease others, and you can only have so many campaign messages. Basically, you're probably talking an upper limit of about 5. Boris Johnson had 2. In 2019, he had 2. It's all he could remember. Get Brexit done and level up. They were wildly successful though. I don't just mean he won the election, therefore they must have been successful. They were both messages that persuaded key voters to vote Tory. They were messages that were designed to appeal to target voters. But they were also messages that didn't actually explain what they meant. Get Brexit done. What does that mean? Everyone who was fooled by it thought they knew what it meant exactly, but you get 2 people who thought they knew what it meant and ask them to talk to each other about what it meant, they'll disagree. Did we get Brexit done? Did we? If we did, why is the government now trying to undo it with the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill? If Brexit got done, why is Boris Johnson now saying that Liz Truss needs to finish getting Brexit done? And what is Brexit? For some, it was just leaving the EU. For others, it was leaving the single market and customs union as well. For more still, it was breaking off all contact with every country in the EU. So because Brexit as a concept means different things to different people, getting Brexit done was similarly ambiguous. It could mean anything. And so people with very different views could think it meant what they wanted and vote for it. And it was designed to appeal to people with different views. It was even designed to appeal to Remainers. Sounds odd. And it did work as well, we know from polling. People who didn't want to leave the EU, who would have voted to remain in a second referendum, they didn't realise that this second referendum was on the cards. All they saw was years of parliamentary paralysis. They just wanted the nightmare over. Brexit was destroying everything. They saw no end in sight. Most people weren't paying attention to the parliamentary process. And, and everything they were promised, if they gave Boris Johnson a majority, it was like it was just going to be over and then the government could focus on being a government. It was all going to be over. He would get Brexit done and the pain would all go away. Yeah, how's that working out? Same with levelling up, really. There was a bit of detail in the manifesto, it has to be said, unlike with Brexit, but most don't read that. The campaign slogan was designed to appeal to people who felt left behind, not just those who were actually left behind, just those who perceived themselves. So it had mass appeal as well, and could mean completely contradictory things to different people. So when it comes to wondering what Starmer's 5-point economic plan is, it can be seen as similar, except where I'll say there's not going to be a huge parallel is, remember, the difference is always that Labour, when they present policies, do mean them. Most parties do. It's not just Labour. The Liberal Democrats do, the SNP do, the Greens do, the Plaid Cymru do. They all do. Except for the Conservative Party. The other thing to bear in mind is which policies do you focus on. There are policies that you would say are clear Labour policies. And there are ones that you would say chime with the key voters who hold the balance of power around the centre. And there are lots of differences, which is why Labour leaders who try to ignore this fact always lose. But there is a significant crossover. The ideal landing zone, if you imagine a Venn diagram, is that overlap. There are policies that are approved of by the small number of voters who actually decide who the government is, and also Labour members. In less ideal circumstances, there may be policies that fall outside of the Labour sphere, but if they're a top priority for these key voters, you must address them. So that's the general stuff out of the way. So on to this specific policy announcement. Now, I've said before, I'm not all that sure that these 5-point plans are all that exciting for voters, because this isn't the first. There's a 5-point plan for Brexit. 5 is the magic number. I mean, maybe he's been told by someone who agrees with me that you can't really go beyond 5 policy areas, or voters will lose interest. That's not to say you can't have more than 5 policies. Obviously, the manifesto will be rammed with them. But in terms of the messages you're getting across, like in every interview, in every campaign video, in every campaign leaflet, you have to target a small number of policy areas, because otherwise people will get lost in the sea of them. So it's like you can pitch 5 things to voters and you do it over a long enough time and they'll remember them. But if you try and pitch 20 to them, it's not that they'll only remember 5 and that it's a random 5 and you've got no control over it. They may not remember any of them because there's just too many. But the 5 points aren't all meaningless either. They have actually been fleshed out in various speeches and publications. So let's go through them. First, we will be financially responsible. Now, I've actually mentioned this one recently, I think. It's basically what Labour have to promise. They always have to promise it if they want to win. The media do a good job of conning the public into thinking that this is the way the Tories are by default and that Labour instinctively are not. It's not true. If you look at the economic data, it's wildly untrue, but it is what people think. So when Labour is actually wanting to win power, it has to stop whining about the Tory press and people getting the wrong idea. You know, when it wants to win, which is not all the time, it has to make this promise. So it has to actually... I often think about Labour as being a little bit like a woman in the business workplace. They have to work harder and be more efficient than their male counterparts to be taken seriously. You know, so what this means, this policy means, is that their spending plans will match their revenue. Borrowing will be for emergencies. Their spending plans will match their revenue. And this is disappointing because it is absolutely economically sensible. For example, you know, Keynesian economics, in tough times, you borrow to spend and then you pay it back in the good times. That's what you do. But you have to play the game. So this one's an easy one to understand. Second, we will be distinctively British. Again, it's designed to appeal to those key target voters who buy into the Tory media tosh about the Conservatives being true blue patriots and Labour being anti-British. Never mind the fact that the current Tory Prime Minister is actually quite likely to be a literal traitor, and certainly there should be an investigation into that, and that their party in general has been generously funded by people with close links to the Kremlin. But again, it's what the media push. Not helped when the tankies were in charge of Labour either. So a Labour Party wanting to win an election for once also has to play the game. It's a bit like, as I say, being a woman in business. You've got to go that extra mile. In terms of the detail of this policy, it is to have government spending used for contracts with British companies. That's what it actually means in terms of what's been said. You know, so remember, for example, do you remember how our EU passports, when we're in the EU, our British passports were produced by a British company, and then the first thing the Tories did with Brexit was make the new ones made by French and Polish companies? This is the opposite of that. It has obvious problems because it may not be the best use of public money. If you're going to have a policy that says prioritise giving these contracts to British companies, which suggests that there will still be foreign companies taking some contracts where it can't be facilitated by a British company realistically. But if you're saying you're going to prioritise that, it does mean it's not going to always be the best use of public money. But again, you have to play the game. After all, if they don't win the election, they don't get to spend any public money. Third, we will work in partnership with business. Hopefully you're seeing the pattern here. Tory media con number 3 is that the Tories are the party of business and Labour treat business owners with contempt, crippling them with regulations and high taxes. Another case of playing the game to make it clear that Labour wants all parts of the economy to succeed. On this occasion, Their task is made a bit easier by the fact that the Conservatives have stopped even pretending to be the party of business. Brexit and their recent penchant for promoting fanatical but otherwise unemployable reprobates into leadership positions has meant the damage they are doing to business is incredibly clear. But it's not enough for the Tories to make a mess of things. Labour still has to show that it will not make the same mistakes. Labour cannot afford to go into the next election like it did in the last, being seen as, well, the Tories are bad, but Labour could be even worse. Fourth, we will re-energise communities and spread economic power. Basically a long-winded way of saying levelling up. They can't say levelling up because the Tories have said that, and people have seen that promise is not being kept. The difference here is that Labour do tend to get on board with it instinctively. It is This is one of those things that is instinctively one of their policies. It is a agreed policy that meets approval of all factions of the party, so no real need to play political games here. And the main thing that makes this policy impossible for the Tories to implement is it would mean redistributing resources away from the Tory heartlands. By definition, levelling up means bringing more in line communities, the poorer communities, towards the wealthier communities. So a Tory government can't do that. They can only promise to do it and then break the promise. But a Labour government can do that and does do that. Not that it's easy. London makes us a very unusual type of economy. You know, I saw it discussed years ago that in a lot of countries you've got a larger city, and it's usually a lot larger than the second largest. But then you do have a second largest, it's not miles behind, and you go so on down the line. In Britain we've got London. It's a behemoth. It's literally a metropolis. Our second city is way smaller. Like London's got a population of nearly 9 million. Birmingham's just over 1 million. And that's it. Everywhere else is less than 1 million population. Germany's largest city is about double its second largest, not nearly 9 times. And it's got several cities with a population of 1 million or more. You know, what this means is when you've got a capital that sort of spreads itself about, if you've got fairly large cities that are not too different from each other, the capital in the country, the investment in the country spreads itself out. It also helps if a country has a political home that's a different city to its financial centre, but that's not always the case. But basically London is a massive black hole sucking everything into it. So diverting resources away can be done, and politically it's much easier for Labour than the Tories, but in terms of solving practical problems it's tricky because you don't always get as much bang for your buck. That being said, putting in place the investment for transport that the Tories promised but never delivered would be an easy early win. There will be other things that are relatively straightforward as well. In fact, actually it's quite easy to make improvements after nearly 15 years of Tory ruin, which is what we will have had by the general election. And then finally, we will refocus our investment on boosting productivity. Now this one's easy. Little example. In 2020, the government stopped our NHS test and trace system, the genuine NHS test and trace system, the one that worked perfectly well, the one that was stopping it spreading. Boris Johnson stopped it so we could all take it on the chin. After a lot of people died, he decided, well, no, I've got a better idea. We'll give £37 billion to a former horse rider to spend on a private test and trace system that we'll call the NHS test and trace system, but that the NHS will have little to do with. So they gave this £37 billion budget to a former horse rider to spend on a privatised system. Now, which would have been better for productivity? £37 billion spent on companies chosen by corrupt Tory ministers and their cronies, or giving that £37 billion to the NHS to say, can you get this test and trace system working like you did before? All Labour have to do is reduce the amount of outsourcing of public services and where private contracts still have to go out, making sure they genuinely are going to the best provider. And you instantly refocus investment on boosting productivity. But this can also mean better transport infrastructure, which nationalising the rail and making good on the Tories' broken promises for the so-called Northern Powerhouse will also achieve. And bear in mind, Keir Starmer has talked about nationalising the rail. So the points do make sense. They're all designed to address specific concerns of key target voters in the red wall and beyond. I still think they need snappy campaign slogans, but hopefully they will come. We don't actually have a campaign yet. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.